And Connie, you're recording?
Yes, it should be automatic, Jane.
Great. Thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to give a couple of minutes for your colleagues to join. Welcome everyone. Delighted you could be with us. We had almost, in fact, we might be at past capacity of 100 attendees for this webinar. Right now, we're at about 35 have joined, so we're just going to give it another minute or so. Please make sure you have a pen and paper or something to take notes on. And we will start in 2 minutes. Cary, is it still as warm in DC today as it was yesterday?
It is going to be 83 degrees today. Crazy. Yes.
All right, that's some good stuff.
It is. So it's cherry blossom season here in DC, and typically the crowds at the cherry blossoms it's just tens of thousands of people down at the tidal basin. So we are planning on riding our bikes down there this afternoon and hoping that it will not be crowded, and we will be able to stay within quarantine distance from everyone else. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's music to the soul, right? Just that natural beauty and being able to enjoy that during this time.
Yeah.
So we're going to make a start. We're at 3 minutes past. Thank you again very much for joining our Churchill webinar today. Typically, we do monthly webinars free of charge in different subjects based on our client and prospect needs. And no surprise right now, our clients have been saying to us, hey, Churchill, we need help with 2 things. A lot of our teams are having to go virtual. We're trying to do the right thing, and while we have technology, we need our leaders to know how to lead in a virtual environment when their people aren't all with them. So that was the first challenge that our clients wanted help with. And the second was leading through what we're all going through now with the virus and the uncertainty and the change of working to home and the isolation changes how we need to lead. It can't all be about being productive. It's about leading human beings. So today we're offering these 2 free webinars. The first one is going to be led by Cary, and we'll have a chance to learn more about Cary if you haven't already worked with her. She's an amazing Churchill coach and OD specialist. And the second one I will do at 1:30 Eastern, which is more leading with compassion, giving your followers what they need through this difficult time. These are completely free, but many of you have asked for deeper solutions. So at the very end, we will pause and share some other options if you need more. But everything in these webinars is meant to help you, be practical, raise your spirits, motivation, and give you something really actionable you can do when you leave this. So if you are new to Churchill, just a quick high level here on the next slide. We're a global organization. We work on, if we can have the next slide, please, Cary. We're a global organization working across all regions, and we help with organizational development, leadership development, and help your teams perform better. And we do it with a strengths focus, skill building and learning journeys. We have over 200 coaches around the globe, experts in their field, business backgrounds, that also play a coaching, consulting, and training role when needed. And Cary will just show a couple of slides of some of our clients. Many are represented today, and we're delighted to be in this with you. Now, I'll tell you a quick story before we introduce Cary. The office I use for Churchill Leadership Group for a long time, I get there this morning for this webinar, and it's been sanitized and closed down. So I am in a corner of not a restaurant, but a sort of country club. So I apologize if there's a little background noise, but I wanted to make sure that I had good Wi-Fi. But we're all going through this together and being agile through these challenges. So Cary, over to you.
Thank you, Jane. And I will give the same disclaimer. I am here in my home in Arlington, Virginia, and I have a 6-year-old who is in the house as well. with a caretaker, with a high school student that also doesn't have school. And I told them to please try to stay out of the office area, but who knows what could happen. So if you see a little redheaded boy walk in and give me a hug or something, we'll just all smile and wave. So thank you everyone for coming. Really excited to spend this time. A little bit about me and where I come from, and it'll help explain a little bit of why I've landed on these particular points in the webinar today. So academically, I am an organizational psychologist. And so what we're going to talk about today is a lot of psychological principles around virtual work. I'm also an executive coach and a certified facilitator. I spend most of my time doing one-on-one coaching and or facilitating leadership team meetings. And I love the neurology of leadership. And so you'll see a bit of that reflected here too. I don't just study leadership and work with it. I'm also a leader in my own right. I've got a nonprofit here in DC that I founded 11 years ago yesterday. Yesterday was our 11th year birthday. So we didn't get to have our big party, of course, because we had to cancel it, but that's okay. And in addition to my first grader here at home, I also have a crazy dog who shouldn't disrupt us. But if she does, all is well. So just to jump right in, the purpose of this webinar is really to help you and help your teams operate successfully in this virtual workspace. And most people on the webinar, we'll get a sense for this later, are probably somewhat familiar with virtual work, meaning that you have people who will sometimes telework. But certainly this global pandemic has created a situation in which teams are purely virtual for a while. Nobody knows how long that will go on. But I don't think that it's wise as leaders to cross our fingers and just sort of wait or hope that it'll be short and wait for it to be over and for people to be back business as normal. We need to be responsive. We need to really see this as an opportunity to learn and to grow. So we're going to talk about three things in particular. One is strategies to increase inclusion and belonging. Some of you, I'm sure, will be very sensitive to that, and others on the webinar are probably kind of shrugging and raising their eyebrows and thinking, it's not such a big deal that people are at home. We'll talk about that a little bit. The second is focusing on results, how to celebrate accomplishments and lead from a results-based viewpoint. And the third is thinking about the communication norms. And again, as the distribution of your team is notably different, your communication norms probably do need to shift a bit. Not drastically, but certainly to accommodate the virtual nature of work. So we're going to dive right in. And these three objectives really align with three psychological differences in virtual work. So those are, right? The first psychological difference is isolation. I mean, it is truly psychologically different to be working in your home or in a home space versus going into an office. And it's also psychologically different to be doing that every day without knowing when that will end versus 1 day a week or 2 days a week. The second is trust, and we'll talk about that a fair amount, but it's just harder to trust in a virtual environment. There ton of research on this, and most people who lead teams will say that, especially if you've not done it and you're not used to it, when your people are teleworking or when they're working virtually, it's just harder to trust that they are being productive, that they are getting things done, that they're getting their questions answered, that they're able to collaborate to the degree that they need to really be successful. And the final is ambiguity, which goes hand in hand certainly with trust. And I think about this a little bit from more of the team member or employee perspective, meaning that when you're a team member at home and you don't have that ability to stop by your boss's office and ask for a bit of clarity, you're working with a lot more ambiguity. And there's ambiguity also even around when people are working right now, when they're available, when they're not, etc. So we're going to dive right in to the topic of isolation. And before I go much further, Jane here is monitoring some of the comments and such, and it's certainly going to speak in and monitor themes and bring things from that chat box. So If you don't have the chat box open, please feel free to open it up. Please feel free and please feel encouraged to include your own thoughts and ideas in there and even respond to one another. So we're going to dive into isolation. So I just ask everybody to sort of think for a moment about this concept of isolation and what it means for us as human beings. And even if you don't like the light and fluffy stuff, there is some really hard science on isolation. Number one, isolation is probably one of the biggest stressors. So research has been very clear that people who are isolated or who feel isolated experience pain from that isolation. And in fact, your brain can't really distinguish the pain of social isolation any different from physical pain. So if you think about that and take that seriously, that means that when we feel socially isolated, we actually are experiencing a physical pain. And think about how well you work when you're in pain, right? Like think of the last time you tried to do really good work when you had a throbbing headache or when you had severe back pain. So we know that pain really does inhibit our ability to be productive, to think clearly, to solve problems, to be analytical. And social isolation is registered as pain to our brain. And yes, this expands upon introverts and extroverts. So it really doesn't matter your personality type. If you feel socially isolated, you will experience that as pain. And I put this picture here because for most of us, even just looking at an image like this, it feels a little threatening, or this, our little Thompson's gazelle here feels threatened. And so if you think about if isolation then feels like this or feels like this to people, then what does it look like to have people around you, right? When you switch these images, most people will report just sort of automatically a sense of relief. Oh, this little guy isn't out there by himself, right? He's got friends, he's got a family, he's got a tribe, he's got a herd. And that's what is in the literature is called social baseline theory. It's basically the idea that we as human beings have a social baseline. We are inherently social animals. And so as leaders, it's an opportunity to think about how can we still create this social environment, even though people are working from their homes. And in San Francisco and California right now, not even allowed to go outside. And I think California is probably just the start of that. The rest of us probably have it coming. So I also want to just talk a little bit about the idea of invisibility and isolation, because if you want to understand isolation and this feeling of isolation, you really have to think about where does isolation come from. And one of the predictors of it is invisibility, right? So it's not only a physical thing, it is very much a psychological thing, that when people feel invisible, that's when they feel isolated. Especially in this global connected world, right? Isolation isn't just physical, it is psychological. And so what that suggests is that if you can break invisibility, you can break isolation. And it's very interesting to think about it even in terms of inclusion, which is something we're all working on in our organizations anyways, because what visibility does is build inclusion. And so how can you help people feel more visible and be more visible? And that's really our first poll question. So my colleague Connie is going to open up a poll for us and really ask you guys to think about what might help your team members feel more visible, meaning feel more seen and more heard, because we know that that's what creates this sense of inclusion. And inclusion is the antonym of isolation. So Connie, can you open up the poll for us? Or maybe it is open and I can't see it on my end.
Cary, while we're waiting for Connie to open the poll, not quite sure what's...
I might be able to launch it myself. But okay. Yeah, do you want to take a moment? And I see that there have been some comments.
I'll share, and then I'll share some of the comments as well. I would have never said I was like a lonely, isolated person. I don't think I've ever experienced that in my life. even through September 11th and everything that happened there. And I lived in New Jersey at the time. But I can tell you the last couple of days, to say I've been feeling out of sorts and more anxious is an understatement. And I started to think about what was it, and it really is this isolation. My son is staying at college in his frat house with his friends for now because, you know, they're safe there. They're 2 hours away, but I can't be with him, not yet anyway. And all my flights to the UK in the next week or so have been cancelled, so I can't see the rest of my family. So I've got my husband, which is fabulous, but these things are sort of out of my control right now. And the isolation is like so hard and it hit me more than I thought. So I think it's real for all of us. And we've been doing some things as a family to make up for it, and they've really helped. But this is really resonating with me, Connie. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cary, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not sure if the poll functionality is going to work for us today, but that's okay. Jane, can you see it on your screen? Probably not.
So I have it up on my screen. It says it's been going for 1 minute and 40 seconds, but it's not registering as voted. So I'm not sure why you guys aren't seeing it.
Sorry, everybody. But that's okay. You know what? Let's just use the comments and do open-ended, right? So instead of, you know, responding to the poll items that we have that you all can't see, I'd ask everybody on the line to take a moment and open up that comment box and just in an open-ended way, tell us what might help your team members feel visible, right? Feel more seen, feel more heard. And as you do that, some of you have probably already contributed some of those. I want to share a story too. I was facilitating a virtual women's leadership group the other day. And one of the members of that group was even sharing that even though rationally she is a driven woman, and so rationally everything was fine, she started to notice that she was having like physical manifestations of some of the isolation. So she struggles from sort of an immune type disorder, and it started flaring up on her, and she noticed it, and so she questioned sort of, what is it that would be causing me this stress, and realized that, yeah, it is all this stuff going around me. So even though I'm able to rationalize it, and in my head, I'm able to make it all okay, her body is responding to it. And it was a big wake-up call for her to really take more time to breathe and more time to focus on her own well-being, even in the midst of this. And Connie, you did it. You got it open. Thank you very much. So the other thing that I'll share as you all do this is just a couple of the really interesting research studies on this. So one is that when you have it, anyone actually sort of around you, it actually lightens that pain. So there's even research on people being shocked, for example. And if you administer shocks, and I know this sounds terrible, but people sign up for this, right? If you administer shocks and nobody's in the room, you experience that shock as, sort of a 10 on a 10 of a scale pain. And then if you have even a random lab assistant in the room with you, your experience of that same level of shock actually comes down. And as you might imagine, if you have somebody like a friend or a partner holding your hand while you're shocked, your experience of that pain is dramatically lower. So that's just one, sort of research study on how significant connection is. And the other is that even having someone around lightens your load. So they've done research with people like walking up steep hills carrying heavy backpacks. And if you have to walk up that hill with that heavy pack on your back by yourself, you experience that as extremely difficult, right? You would say that this was, X amount of difficulty for you. If you do it with anyone else, that the level of difficulty actually drops significantly. And so that's what we're talking about here. It might not be physical in the same room, but how do you create that connection where people actually feel like they're not doing this alone? So
can I share a little of what's going on in the chat, Cary?
Please.
A couple of good ideas. I mean, what I love about this opportunity is we can help each other feel we belong and we're included with simple fun stuff. And one member here, Agneta, shared about a team coming together and one person started wearing a funny hat on their Zoom calls, and then everyone got a funny hat and made it fun. Having a WhatsApp group. We certainly do that at Churchill with our leadership team because we're global with different time zones, and we really use that, and it brightens our day. So some of the simple things done well can make a difference. There was a story, I learned a lot about diversity, inclusion, and belonging, DIBS as we call it, from Pat Waters, who's a CHRO at ServiceNow, who's one of Churchill's clients. And she described it as diversity exists. Inclusion is being invited to the party. Belonging is being asked to dance. Right? And there's a big difference between being at a party and stood up against a wall versus being asked to dance and you actually get to belong. So how do we help each other belong? Because it's needed. And there are many ways to do it. Thank you for the evidence, Cary.
Absolutely. And that's such a great analogy, right? So inviting someone to a call, right, is the inclusion piece, right? That somebody invited me to join them for a meeting, right? But more socially, maybe a virtual happy hour. And then how can you make them dance, right? So the hat to me is a great example of how everybody can get invited to dance and play along. It's something that's accessible to everybody. So let's keep going. We're going to talk about the next piece. And before we go there, I put together one tip for everyone. Again, I think you're probably learning just as much from each other as from me. But here's a coach tip, and that is to actually make a list of everybody on your team if you are a leader. And of course, you can expand beyond your team. Think about peers. Think about people that you are their primary touch point for in the office or at work. Make a list, right? Make a spreadsheet if you want to get Excel out, and actually track your engagement with those people. Because I think what's very important here is to recognize that you're going to very naturally do this with some people, but what about the people that you're not naturally doing it with? Who's reaching out to them? And what we don't want is for people to sort of fall through the cracks. And so being deliberate about it looks like maybe making a list and kind of tracking your engagement with people. And it's a great accountability piece. And then if you want to take that to the next level, you can sort of create columns on your list and think about the ways that you engaged with them, right? Did you ask them how their work was doing? Great, check. Did you ask them how their family is, right? Great, check. Did you ask them, and just think about the different dimensions that you might do. All right, so let's now talk about trust. This is a tricky one anyways, and most of us see it that way. So I've worked with a number of organizations over the past decades where telework is becoming more and more common. And a lot of managers, a lot of leaders have trouble with this anyways. That when people are teleworking, you can hear it in the way they talk about it. They don't really trust that people are working the same or even better at home than they are in the office. And that's the promise of working from home. The promise is that you get time undistracted, where you can really focus in and do things that are harder to get to with all the disruptions of the office. But we know that leaders have a hard time with this anyways. And so my concern as a psychologist is that, for your super top performers, you're probably not worried. But for some of your mediocre performers or maybe newer team members, and certainly for some folks on your team that trust is harder anyways, that this experience of being purely virtual for a while is really going to disadvantage some people on your team because your level of trust in them might really drop. So this is really psychologically or neurologically, it's the negativity bias in our brain. That's what it represents. And I think most people have heard this quote. I have no idea who said it. I tried to Google it and Google couldn't tell me. But in the absence of information, we assume the worst. Like when we don't know, we tend as human beings, whether you're more positive, more negative as a person, it doesn't matter. When you don't know, you are much more likely to attribute something negative than something positive. Again, even if you're typically a very positive person. And where this comes from is really this concept of the ladder of inference. I'm sure many of you have seen this. If you haven't, I strongly recommend getting on Google and typing it in. There's some great little videos that kind of walk you through the ladder. But the idea is, this is how our brain processes information. And it all comes at the bottom of the ladder from what we see, right? Observe. It's through our eyes. Of course, it's through our other senses as well. And so you can imagine that, you know, basically, if you're used to being in an office environment, you have a whole lot more coming at you. You have a lot more to observe. And your assumptions and your conclusions and your beliefs and all this is based on all of that information. So now when you're working behind a screen of a computer from your living room or your home office, you have much less information coming at you, especially about your team members. You might see emails that they send, you might see some messages, but it's probably significantly less information than you see on a normal basis. And so in the absence of that information, you are much more likely to assume that actually nothing is happening. You can't see anything. It's hard to hear anything, or you see less, hear less, less is happening, is the conclusion that your brain is likely to draw. And then the really significant thing about this ladder of inference is actually that reflexive loop that you see coming across the side of the ladder. And that's the idea that as soon as we have a belief, our brain filters information to support that belief, basically. We are much more likely to notice things that we believe than things that we don't believe. So our beliefs adjust our radar. And so if you start believing that one of your team members isn't doing as much, you will notice everything that supports that belief. And you're much less likely to notice the things that don't support that belief. So it's really a bit of a catch-22. So I'm going to jump to the poll again, and I think we troubleshot that, so I think we've got it going. And here's the question. This is a little bit deeper of a question, but I want you to think about how might you, sorry, I've got the poll up on my screen. Sorry, technical difficulties, guys.
I don't know if it's Zoom is slow because I've launched poll number 2 as well. Is anyone seeing it? I think it's up.
Maybe it's up. Okay, here we go. Thanks.
Let us know in the chat box, please.
I'm just going to leave my tip in the background, but I'll get to it in a minute. So yeah, let's focus on the poll. Please answer the question at the poll and also contribute your own ideas to the chat box. So how might you ground your assessments of team members' productivity and performance, even when you can't see them? And what I was trying to get to there is this idea of ground. So basically that means ground it in data, right? The bottom of the ladder. So when you're finding yourself making assumptions and forming beliefs about people, and in this day and age, it's beliefs about their productivity, beliefs about their integrity, beliefs about their ability to navigate kind of in this uncertain time. How can you ground those things, bring them down to facts and data? So Jane, do you see responses coming into the poll yet? You're on mute, Jane.
Yeah, people are saying when they try to click, it's closed. So this must be a Zoom issue, not surprising. Connie and I tried to contact Zoom. Yes, oh, yeah, we see votes. There's a delay at Zoom. We tried to call Zoom yesterday. We were 534th in line at Zoom. And I tried to chat last night and it was 174th. So I think everything's slower with Zoom. So
I think everyone's using Zoom right now. Yep. So yeah, we're going to have some glitches as we go.
The poll is working. Thank you for everyone being patient with everyone. Can you see it, Connie? Can you see it, Cary, the results?
Yeah, now I can. Thank you.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'll leave this open for a moment here as you type those in. And again, I'm willing to bet that you guys have a lot more things that you could even add to this list. So feel free to use the chat function to give your own recommendations. And Jane, I'm going to ask you to sort of monitor that chat. And as you see really good ideas coming in, you can share them.
Will do. Absolutely. There was one piece of information, if I may, Cary. I noticed this week regarding productivity. Like, are my people working? Can I trust them to be working? And the data that I saw was survey of 7,000 workers by FlexJobs said 65% of those workers found that actually they were more productive working from home. So one of the things that I might do with a team member is ask them around, how are you rating your productivity working from home right now? And if they say like 6 out of 10, well, how can I help you get it higher? Right? Because there's ways you can help people versus assuming they've got the ill intent.
Yeah. And that's, Jane, that really speaks to certainly to you as a leader coach, right? Anyone who's worked with Jane knows how incredible of a leader coach she is. That's her go-to, is to take this coaching approach. And that was a perfect demonstration of it. And we would absolutely encourage everyone, right, to start with sort of that open-minded, curious, open-ended question and just talk to people about this and make it okay maybe for them to have a hard time focusing. Make it okay for them to open up about some of the challenges of childcare at the same time, homeschooling, right, at the same time as trying to work. Because if they can be open and talk to you about it, then you can start to solve together for it. And you may, as you put on your coaching hat, you may be able to help them think through how to solve it for themselves. And that's really that role of a leader coach. Excellent. So I think I'm going to click a button that says share results and see if that works. Although I'm not sure it will. So we'll see if those come up. But basically the one in the poll that went out there was defining desired results versus activities. And so I'll speak a bit to that for a moment, since it was our #1 vote. I think that is actually the crux of trying to manage in this virtual world. It does not work to try to manage 2 activities at all when you're in a virtual environment. And so if you have not already shifted your leadership approach more towards like a results-oriented approach, this is the perfect opportunity to flex that muscle. And a very tangible way to do that is to start to ask yourself, for the purpose of what? For the purpose of what are you asking people to do any given activity that they're working on? What is the result that you're going for? And if you can start to define those results crisply and clearly, people will figure out how to get it done. And my guess is that in the virtual environment, they're going to have to get it done differently. So in many cases. So the same activities that they were doing in the office, they're not going to work anyways. People are going to have to figure other ways to get the results that they were after.
Cary, can I reinforce that, please? It's one of the people that trained me in some of the strengths work was Marcus Buckingham, and a lot of you know who he is from many of the books, etc. And he's like a global leader of manager effectiveness, and he always says about great leaders focus on the end result and then give people the space and the feedback and the coaching that goes with it to figure out how to get there. Because how I might get there as a leader to get to that result might be very different how Cary might get there. And I have to recognize, if I was smart enough to have Cary on my team, I got to believe that Cary has the potential to do this and I can support her, but it might not be my way. And that, with this transition again, is another way of Cary might do it differently. Now she's working from home, and that's fine. So I truly believe through this experience we're all going through that we'll all learn to be better leaders, because we've had to have more difficult experiences. And that's what's exciting about this. We also have a couple of other tips coming in. Paula recommends using the Johari window along with the ladder that you used earlier to help us recognize our blind spots. Lisa loves the idea of weekly check-ins and maintaining an action log and shared tasks so we can prioritize and review the progress we're making together. Assume goodwill, good intent. Janine says team personality styles, extroverts, introverts. Obviously, we're huge fans of strengths to help you understand your team better, accelerate that with some sort of assessment. And then Karen is saying, with uncertainty and fear will impact the ability for people to be productive. Leaders need to acknowledge and appreciate this is a great time to infuse calm, right? We can't control the anxiety and fear. It's going to be there to some degree, but together we can bring a sense of calm and a little more certainty.
Awesome. So our tip on this one, which I just went past. Oh well. Are you guys still seeing the poll, or are you seeing the tip? What do you see, Jane?
I'm seeing the tip.
Okay, there we go. Good. The tip here is to really acknowledge at least one accomplishment or effort that's done by each of your team members, if possible every day, but certainly on a weekly basis. And this, again, that's sort of focused on if you force yourself to notice the things that your team members are doing, you're much less likely to have that reflexive loop kind of come in. And so in other words, you're sort of looking for data. You're not just assuming, making the most, I like to say, making the most generous assumption. I stole that from someone recently, and it's my new favorite saying. So you're not just making the most generous assumption about their work, you're actually looking for it so that you can tangibly acknowledge and recognize people's successes. And I also expanded here simply to say that if you will do that, if you will look for these opportunities to recognize and acknowledge the work that people are doing in this difficult time, then if and when there comes a time that you do have to have a difficult conversation and you have to do it by phone or by video because you feel like someone isn't doing what they need to do for your business right now, these positive conversations, the acknowledgement, the recognition, it becomes this container in which those difficult conversations can be had. So if they haven't heard anything from you, and then the first thing they hear from you is this isn't working, or you're not doing this right, or are you really working? That's going to be a big problem. If they've seen that you're recognizing them for the things they're doing, and then you have a conversation that's around, you know what, this thing isn't working, that's much more likely to be received positively and be a productive conversation. So let's move on to the third piece. So ambiguity, we've already touched on that a little bit. And I'm thinking about this again, primarily from the team member perspective, that when you are isolated from those day-to-day, those more information-filled interactions, things just get a little bit more confusing. They get a little murkier. And a major form of ambiguity at a time like this is as basic as who's working right now, right? Who's on, who can I call? And at some companies that may be less severe than at others. I know in a lot of the companies that I'm working with, people really do have a lot of kids at home, and the flexibilities have increased such that people can work any time of the day. So they may not be working between 8 and 5. Right? They may be getting their hours in the evening or in the early morning or even in the middle of the night. And so when that's the case and you don't know, even who you can reach out to or who's online, that creates a lot of ambiguity. So very broadly speaking, this is not a poll, actually. This is just a place where we really wanted to hear from you. So please use the chat and just in an open-ended way, take a moment and reflect on and then share with the entire group what ambiguity, right, is this crisis creating for your team? And think broadly. What ambiguity is this creating? Take a few minutes to do that. Jane is going to monitor those chats.
While we're waiting for the chats to come in, one colleague mentioned, I think it was Kathy, about would you do daily check-ins with your team, Cary? How would you respond to that, please?
Yeah, Kathy, that's a great question. And I haven't said too much about that on this webinar, but I do think that leaders want to be very cognizant of the fine line between including people and reaching out and acknowledging them and being perceived as checking in or micromanaging. And I think that's the fine line, and that's tough. I don't think that there's one answer for anybody, for any given person, because I think it depends a lot on the way you were leading beforehand. So I would, in most cases, I would encourage you to, check in every day, but maybe don't ask the same question every day, right? So if every day you're asking, what are you getting done? I don't think, for most people, that's not going to go over well. That's going to be perceived as micromanaging. But if one day you're saying, hey, just wanted to make sure you and your family are okay, wanting to kind of check in a bit on how you all are feeling about all of this. And then the next day you're asking, hey, give me a sense of how your work is going. And then the next day, maybe you're checking in and just saying, hey, I don't know, just asking sort of a more open-ended creative question, like what's one positive way to spin this whole experience, and getting people to think and share. So that's my sense.
Thank you, Cary. I read somewhere as well, someone in the last week, this is great news. I can work from home, no interruptions, and finally get my work done, right? So I think now is a prime opportunity to really get to know the individuals on your team. Someone mentioned about assessments. We love the strengths assessment, because not only does it help you understand people's potential and focus on what's right with them right now, but it also speaks to what they need to thrive. And for someone, once a day would just be a nightmare, versus once a week and a more quality conversation, if they have high sort of related talent, for example, might benefit them more. So I would add to that is ask your people. Don't make assumptions, not one size fits all. Now more than ever, you need to understand the uniqueness of each of your team, as well as the aggregate of what the team needs collectively. There's quite a few things here as well. There are less, with the ambiguity question, Cary, there are less boundaries on work hours. So people feel a need to be on all the time when they see others working. I guess that could create some sort of pressure, right? That, goodness, I'm working more hours than ever. Also, leaders asking us what are recommendations to hold my team members accountable in this environment. So please come back to that in a second, Cary. How do we hold our team members accountable in this environment? Because I'm sure senior executives are worrying, is the work getting done? Right? But they're so far removed from your team members. How can you answer that question? Oh, this is one for me. How long is this going to go on? I have high futuristic, and I am completely flawed because I have no clue what's going to happen in the future, and I'm having to deal with that, right? But I will. I'll manage with my team. How can communication and group meetings? How much communication and group meetings to have? Yeah, that's a good question. Resetting and reaffirming priorities. Oh, yeah, we can talk about that a bit more on the next webinar as well. The situation is significantly fluid. We don't know what next week looks like, next month, I would even say next day. Hits hard on the aspects of the SCARF model. For those of us who know it, the SCARF model is a great model in the leadership world. Goals. Okay, our world's changed. Have our goals changed? Yeah, we have to be comfortable with ambiguity. This is a new reality. So that was a lot, Cary. Any quick responses here?
Yeah, it is a lot, but I do think this is why we hit on this, is because there are all of these questions. And so right? Paula, ambiguity around goals. So as a leader, you need to be asking those questions to those above you, right? Like there needs to be, you need to be thinking about what clarity do I need for myself? How can that clarity then cascade down to my team? And it really does differ person by person. Jane, you almost set me up perfectly for my next slide. And so when this is a lot, and I won't say too much about it, but it is just one example of how vastly different people are, that our concerns differ, right? So in a time of chaos like this, every single person has a slightly different concern. Some people are really concerned about just the tension and the discord. Some people are really concerned about being disconnected. Some people are really concerned about falling behind or messing something up, or even just like not knowing. Like not knowing is paralyzing to some people. Some people just have to have things planned out, and this inability to plan is going to be a major trigger for them. But the beauty is that if you can tell what are the major trigger points for each of your people, you can have conversations with them and lessen some of the ambiguity. So for example, actually I was talking with someone the other day that is a serious planner, and she had navigated this beautifully. So she had reframed planning as a day-to-day thing, which is not the mindset of a typical planner. But she had done it, right? Because her strength is planning. And so typically she's planning 6 months out. But in this time, she was able to say, you know what? I'm going to have the perfect plan for the day, for today, when I wake up every morning. And that was able to give her a level of comfort that's really enabling her to execute, which is great. So as a leader, again, if you can sense what are really the trigger points for each of your people and fill in their ambiguity gaps, and don't assume that it's the same for every person. So some people may be really concerned about goals, right? And some people may be more concerned about something like the loss of opportunity. So sort of try to customize your conversations to each of your team members. So I wanted to give a tip for each of these, and this is my tip for this one. And that is to be intentional about creating new communication norms. So for example, most leaders don't talk about goals and goal shifts every day, but it might be that you want to have a 5-minute tag up during this time with your team every morning, just to talk about, hey, what are our goals for today? Or who's going to be in the office today? Or, right, what is it that people are dealing with at home, and how does that impact the way that they want to be contacted and the way that they're working? So think about what your team needs, but do something to explicitly address communication norms. And then have these conversations with your team members about what you want them to do when they have concerns. So when they start to feel, when one of their needs starts to get triggered, how do you want them to engage with you? Because it's going to be different than it is on a day-to-day basis for a while. And this is just a rapidly changing time. There's going to be things that are rapidly emerging. So I think we have a couple more moments for Q&A. We don't have a lot more time, but let me open it up for a moment for any lingering questions. You can type those into chat.
I'm seeing from Janine the importance of giving people some space as they transition to this new working virtually in the environment that we're working. So it's okay to be a little patient, I think, as a leader, to give people space. Now's the time to show patience and not rush, compassion and caring. Yeah, we're in this for the long haul, right? We're in the leading our teams for the long haul. We're in the business for the long haul, so that's important. All right, and recontracting with each other. Resetting the norms. That's a great one, Paula. Let's go back
Yes.
to basics and understand what each of us need from each other.
It's a great
Yeah.
opportunity to do that. There are so many teams that have not contracted in probably years or ever. And so why not leverage this as an opportunity to have some of those basic conversations again?
This is this is a good one. What if people have needs but they aren't aware of them? Right? You can see maybe they're struggling, but they're not articulating that or aren't realizing how much they're struggling. How might you address that? Thank you, Karen. What do you think, Cary?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I'll tell you how I manage that as a coach, and that is that I start by sharing observations. So my guess is that if they truly have needs that they aren't aware of, that is going to manifest it in some ways, right? For example, it might manifest in them, having less patience with their team members. And so I would share that as a leader and as a coach. I would say, hey, I've noticed that you seem to have a bit less patience with your team members, right? Can you think about it for a minute? Do you have an idea of where that might be coming from? And so it's really the sharing of observations. What you're noticing are the manifestations of those things, and asking some really non-judgmental and non-threatening questions to help them think about where it's coming from.
Thank you, Cary. If you can stop sharing, I'm going to share in a second my screen. As we make that transition, I'm also going to cover a couple of things here. What about leaders through this time that need to show compassion and it's just not their go-to style, right? Eva, we're going to share more about that on the next webinar. If you can't make it, it will be recorded and shared. So definitely try and use that and share it with your teams. Timmy and Karen talked a little about sort of what do you need as a leader? If you're running a sales team, should your sales targets be adjusted through this disruption? Well, that's like, I would go above. Speak to your leaders, speak to your peers. You need to feed your needs too as a leader. You're only as strong for your team as you are strong for yourself. So we'll talk at the next webinar about wellness as well and compassion for self. So I would definitely encourage you to make sure you're getting enough of the type of time Cary has described with your boss and with your peers so that you're connected on that level as well. Now, one other thing I wanted to as I share my screen here, is remind ourselves that we were asked to do this by clients to bring you these tips, and we're more than happy to do so. We also recognize that some of you, particularly those of you in HR or running a larger organization, might need more of this for more of your leaders. And this is what we do anyway, regardless of the corona situation. So we've adapted some of what we do to give you some quick win solutions if you need them. The first one is if you want to talk to us further, like have one-on-one time with Cary or myself, email us at solutions@churchill-lg.com, right? So it's my email, but instead of Jane, solutions. That's pretty easy. That gets to us. We also have some very specific virtual team programs. So these are run virtually. The first one is for a more customized intact group of 12 leaders or a team. It would be over several months. That is more in depth. It covers in more detail with experiential exercises and peer interaction, lots of exercises and activities, real world practicality. So there's that one. And the second one is for a larger group of leaders where you want a one-off experience that goes deeper than today. That's a 4-hour one-off Zoom for up to 100 people. So that's another option if you think any of these work for you. Our executive coaching that we always do continues. All sessions over the 6 months will be virtual, so we still do that if you need it. And those that are taking place will continue. We're even looking at putting our Leader as Coach program virtually, but we're also, by customer demand, coming up with coaching power packs. Some of your leaders who are used to traveling around the world and the country might need a bit of help. And so this are 3 sessions with one of our executive coaches to focus on what they need right now. And so that would cost about the cost of a business trip for a leader. So if your leaders need a little more support right now, just in time help, that's what that's about. And then we have our strong teams, our Strengths Finder work. This can be done brilliantly across teams by Zoom and other webinar options. Again, we use breakout rooms. It's very interactive. You can do it if you've never done Strengths Finder before. It's arranged depending on your budget and size of your team. If you've done Strengths Finder with us, it's an accelerator version to help you go deeper and give you what you need right now. But that will give you real insight on the individuals within your team and how to help them thrive. Then, of course, we've got wellness programs and our other team programs. So that's just a bit of background. If you want more, come to us. We'll work with you. We'll work with you to get you what you need. So, Cary, I think we have about 2 minutes for any final Q&A. We have a couple I'm coming up here. Can you show the Churchill email again? I'm going to pop it in the chat. This gives away how slow of a typer I am, doesn't it? All right.
I'm scrolling through the chat for lingering
it's
questions.
in there, solutions@churchill-lg.com. Thank you for asking for that, Stephanie. Thank you, Karen, for saying this is so relevant. Big thanks to Cary. Thank you, Paula, for the thanks. We're happy to do more of these in the future. We just go by your lead. So if you need a particular subject 2 weeks from now in this area, we can do another free one. We're happy to do that. We're in this together. We learn as we go from you as well. One more. Thank you. Thank you. You are welcome. So with that, let me say a personal thank you to Cary. Thank you for being with us through the change with Zoom slowness, my no office. I got to find a no office now. And Cary's your expertise. Thank you, everyone. Stay
Thank you,
safe.
everyone.
Follow the guidance, and we will talk to you soon. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Connie.
Thanks, Connie.
Thank you, guys.